okay? A drug dealer will kill 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people during the course of his or her life. Thousands of people are killed, or their lives are destroyed, their families are destroyed.
Research indicates that there's a strong correlation between regions of high opioid prescription rates and high overdose rates.
I mean, if you look at it, 4 of 5 injectable drug users started getting opioids, whether it be OxyContin, prescription or non-prescription pill taking. So there's a direct correlation between the two.
Annually, more than 214 million prescriptions for opioid pain have been given out, with more than 11 million people abusing their medication. But how did this problem get so catastrophic?
Johnson & Johnson's quiet domination of the opioid market. Explain how key Johnson & Johnson was and how this market and the epidemic developed simultaneously. How did they do it?
Sure. So the company's role was really multi-pronged. So on the one hand, they had their own opioid products that they were selling and they were marketing, and they had a whole sales force of folks who were going to doctors and encouraging doctors to prescribe those medications. But also, and this is something that I think that most people don't know about Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson had 2 subsidiaries that were responsible for manufacturing the majority of active ingredients in opioids that were marketed and sold in the United States, not just Johnson & Johnson opioids, but all sorts of opioids. So the way that they did this was back in the 90s, they had developed this high thebaine poppy. Thebaine is a type of opioid that's used in a lot of painkillers. And back in the 90s, they were able to connect with what is now Purdue Pharma to basically say, look, we have all these poppies, we have this active ingredient, we can help you to make this opioid painkiller, and we can supply as much of it as you want. And
let's be clear. American publicly traded company Johnson & Johnson enriched opiate to make it more addictive, contacted America's biggest volume and psychotropic drug seller to supply them with opiate, as well as various other companies and other publicly traded U.S. companies also produced enriched opium for medication purposes. That more people are led to doing drugs from prescribed medications, right, than they are from marijuana. What you're looking at here is a direct correlation between Johnson & Johnson manufacturing of and enriched opiums in the 90s to manufacturers starting to prescribe opiates to patients, and an increase in opiate deaths. It is clear who created the opiate epidemic in America. It is American public traded companies. So who benefits from it are the investors, CEOs, the people you look up to, and mainstream America, as well as Wall Street. Their stocks has risen after agreeing to pay out settlements for wrongly marketing and distributing opiates. For their wrongdoings is not significant, right, to the profits they have made from the destruction off of them peddling opiates in the community. So they will rather take it to the profits and deal with having a drug-addicted society. You're looking at American greed at its best.
The intent purpose is so that we can really impact the war on drugs. And if you're going to deal in drugs, I'm going to make it so it's not profitable for you. I'm going to take every last penny you have if you're dealing in drugs. But it's a shame if they're using RICO dollars to fund their counting. You can't just look at, yeah, look, I got overtime money.
Within 5 months of its IPO, INSA shares shot up 400%. And John Kapoor's $80 million personal investment was worth close to $550 million. Investors were doing well too.
Now, during those proceedings, it became apparent that the Sacklers siphoned off over $10 billion from the company in the years following their first guilty plea back in 2007 with the Justice Department.
In civil forfeiture, if the government thinks that your property is somehow connected with a crime, they can take it, and they can do all this without ever charging you with a crime, much less convicting you with one.
I guess those forfeiture laws only apply to a lower class of American society. I guess the elites are able to keep their wealth. See, the trick is these forfeiture laws are meant for small states to be able to finance themselves off of a problem that was created by Fortune 500 companies and the United States government, right? So after they turn you into a drug addict, under the perception that you are using drugs or doing drugs or buying illicit drugs, they are allowed to take whatever's left from you at will. And those who created this are allowed to withdraw billions of dollars. The reason why this is acceptable and applicable in America, right, is because of white supremacy. Because poor whites have no issue with this oppression being applied to blacks, and then the media makes it look as if it's mostly a black issue, right? When it's overwhelmingly still applied to Europeans, because they are the most drug addicts.
So you can kill thousands of people. They catch a drug dealer. They don't even put him in jail.
I'm actually not sure who Trump is talking about when he says they catch a drug dealer and don't put a drug dealer in jail, because 45% of the federal prisons is drug offense. According to these records, there's 8,100,000 something people in prison in America throughout state prisons, and about 1.2 million of those are locked up for drug offenses. So somebody goes to jail for drug offenses. I guess he's talking about these people because they the only skittlers, because they the only people who will kill thousands of people from the selling of drugs. They the only people who have the distribution to sell thousands, millions of people drugs in order to affect thousands of overdose.
The story of the Sacklers starts in 1952 when three psychiatrist brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond, purchased a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue. Together, they co-authored over 100 research papers on the biochemistry of mental illness. Arthur Sackler doubled as an advertising pioneer in pharmaceuticals. Perhaps by using his research papers as leverage, he was the first to convince the Journal of the American Medical Association to run an ad brochure in color. Arthur went on to make Valium the first drug to pass 100 million sales. He did this by marketing it as a drug to cover all kinds of ailments with a made-up term he called psychic tension. During the 1980s, a recent movement in medicine was taking place. It was called hospice. The hospice sector takes care of the terminally ill and end-of-life patients. Around this time, the Sacklers company Purdue would release a morphine-based pill called MS-Content that could help cancer patients sleep. In the hospice market, addiction wasn't an issue because the patients would soon pass. Purdue would take this concept one step further. They would release MS-Content for general use. Unfortunately, MS-Content would be the precursor to the drug that would help create an epidemic.
By 2001, Purdue was selling more than $1 billion worth of OxyContin a year. Prescriptions for other opioids soared too, for drugs like Percocet and Vicodin.
We went from a country that used almost no opiate painkillers, like in the 50s and 60s, to being a country where we used 83% of the world's oxycodone and almost 98% of the world's hydrocodone.
It was just months after Subsys was launched that the first whistleblowers began to emerge.
I first heard about INSYS in the end of 2013. One of the chief civil lawyers in our office forwarded me a whistleblower complaint. I was at the time the chief of the healthcare fraud unit of the United States Attorney's Office in Boston. All the whistleblowers made similar allegations. All over the country, these doctors were being bribed and were writing massive volumes of prescriptions for one of the most dangerous drugs on the market. Every investigation of one of these companies starts with, is it possible to go after them criminally? But they're always very difficult.
The company announced it was being investigated. Word spread on Wall Street.
I would say there was something of a collective shrug. There have been a whole host of investigations of other companies that are industry leaders, and big fines that were paid. And so I think the market looked at this as another investigation.
What do you want? I represent Mr. Wade and Ms. Chapman, who are currently charged with multiple felony offenses here in Arizona. They were arrested by the state police here because they were found to be growing 14 medical marijuana plants here in their property, in their garden. As a result, they currently are facing a mandatory prison sentence of 4 to 10 years if they're convicted of this offense. And they're also facing the seizure and forfeiture of Mr. Wade's home, 26 acres of property, all of their vehicles and other property, personal property that the police seized when they raided the home.
See, when you're dealing with the white lease, it's just another investigation, right? When you're dealing with the white lease, there's a great potential that nothing will happen. Nobody worried. We just shrug our shoulders. But when you're dealing with the lower class of American society, there's grave consequences for selling things as like weed. Cannabis have been shown to assist people to relieve chronic pain. This is why you will always hear people with chronic pain are prescribed to use medical marijuana. Pay attention to this. Although not all types of cancer are affected, marijuana is known to slow down the development of cancer. There is also evidence that cannabis accompanied by other treatments has helped to stop cancer. In 2015, the rate of absolute zero deaths from marijuana overdose remained steady from the year before, according to figures released in December by the Center for Disease Control. But while Americans aren't dying as a result of marijuana overdose, the same can't be said for a range of other substances, both legal and illicit. See this? This is the number of deaths from prescription drugs. 10,000, 2001. You had close to 30,000 deaths from prescription drugs. Number of deaths from prescription opiate pain reliefs. 2014, you was close to 20,000 deaths. You're looking at marijuana scheduled classification. U.S. Department of Justice background. Scheduled controlled substance maintained marijuana is scheduled the number 1 of the Controlled Substance Act. You see this? Marijuana is listed as Schedule 1. The DA Drug Schedule Organization drug introduced groups based on risk of abuse or harm. These drugs with high risk and no counterbalancing benefits are banned from medical practice and are Schedule 1 drugs. A drug of chemical can be treated as a Schedule 1 substance for chemical prosecution, even if it is not a controlled substance. Controlled drugs that are considered to have virtually no risk for addiction, abuse, or harm are not scheduled. Examples of those would be insulin, blood pressure, and chronic medical. Often searched for are marijuana falls into Schedule 1. The Controlled Substance Act was passed in 1970 at a time when there was a war on drugs and the concept of zero tolerance and pot as a gateway drug was mainstream thinking. One of the many unintended consequences of sliding marijuana into Schedule 1 was the restriction it placed on the ability to conduct research to discover if and what are the medical properties of marijuana and what are the dangers without good or even reasonable quality research. Without good or reasonable quality research. I want y'all to understand what this means. The United States government labeled marijuana a Schedule 1 drug, banning it from being able to be used as any means of medical research. So they could not search the pain properties of marijuana in order to make medications to kill pain out of marijuana, but they was allowed to do it out of opiates. So your government is complicit in turning you into drug addicts.
The drugs has never been a problem like we have right now. And by the way, like the world has with drugs.